Welcome everyone, and this lecture opens module 4, which is the last module of this course. So the module 4 actually is asking a practical question that once we accept that economy must operate within ecological limits, something that we have been discussing in the first, particularly in the first and the second module, then what tools does state, more broadly this society actually have to steer it there, to ensure that we all operate within the ecological limits? Do we have any tool? So in this particular module, we survey the main families of environmental policy instruments, such as command and control, market-based instruments. There's also something called payment for ecosystem services, and also voluntary and information-based approaches. So then we step back and ask why real world environmental governance always, relies on a mix of instruments rather than following a single one. So that is something that we will be dealing with today in today's lecture within the module 4. So let me begin, with a simple question that why environmental policy? Why do we actually need an environmental policy? Or in a way, in other words, a case for government intervention, why government interventions are needed. So if you ask me why do we need environmental policy, the answer is that markets alone often fail to protect the environment. In a market economy, prices guide our decisions. They tell consumers what to buy, producers what to produce through the price signals. Ideally, prices should reflect the true value and cost of goods and services, right? However, when it comes to environment, many important costs and benefits are not included in market prices. And if you remember, we discussed about it, and something we will again touch upon today, what is externalities. But in module 1, we did discuss in detail when we were studying the environmental economics, what exactly is externalities. So so as a result, what happens is that nature is often treated as if it is free. Forests, rivers, biodiversity, we have been discussing this. They are overused because of their true value, not reflected in economic decisions. And environmental policies exist to correct these failures and to ensure that environmental costs benefits are taken into account. So that's the major role of an environmental policy. But if you remember, we again discussed why market fails, and there are 4 reasons for market fail. I'm not going to go too detail into it, as we did have a detailed discussion in earlier lecture. But if you remember and recollect, one is an externality. So today we are talking about environmental policies. One of the reasons why we need environmental policies is to ensure that these externalities gets reflected, or these externalities are taken care of in the market, in the pricing mechanism. So if you remember, we discussed about both positive and negative externality. Pollution, for example, is a classic example of negative externality. While factory produces goods and earns profit, but the smoke it releases pollutes the air. So now we need a policy here to ensure that somebody who is benefiting by producing a product and somebody else is bearing the burden, how do you ensure that society does not bear this cost, and the one who is polluting should bear this cost? So you need a kind of a policy. So the question here is that who should pay for pollution? It should be the producer, the consumer, or society. And we believe that a good policy, an environmentally good policy, will be able to bring the balance here. We also discussed about the second one, which is public goods. Some environmental resources, if you remember, are public good. I give you the example of park. Similarly, clean air, stable climate, biodiversity are all public goods. And if you remember, we discussed that public goods have 2 important characteristics: non-rival, non-excludable. And then because they are non-rival and non-excludable, there is always a problem of free rider problem. And as a result, market provide too little of these goods, because what actually should be the price, it doesn't get reflected. It's also like a positive externality. If we would have been able to pay better, or if this would have got reflected in the market, maybe we would have been able to produce much more public good. But that is one of the reasons why we say that they are always underproduced. So the question is, would anyone voluntarily pay to protect the climate or the ozone layer if everyone else could benefit for free? So that's the biggest question, right? I mean, if I keep a river clean, if I go and always make sure that I'm cleaning this river up, but nobody is paying me for that, but that I am cleaning the river is benefiting everybody in and around who are not doing anything at all to keep the river clean, then how long would somebody keep doing this voluntarily if not paid for? So this is why it is something we say that they are underproduced or they are pre-rider problems. Then we also discussed about common pool resources, fisheries, groundwater, forests, the classic example of grazing lands. And if everybody tries to maximize their own benefit, we discussed about this, that the resources are often overused, and that actually led to the famous idea of tragedy of commons given by Hardin. However, it is also important to remember that this is not always the outcome, as Ostrom challenges this, and she showed that local communities can actually successfully manage commons through cooperation and straight rules. But these are some of these, the reason why market actually fails. These are the characteristics, that is externalities, the public goods, then common pool resources, and also information failure. This is sometimes people simply do not have enough information to make environmentally responsible choices. For example, consumers may not know how much carbon was emitted to produce a product. So you may continuously keep buying that product just because of your ignorance, how much water is used to grow your food. So these are some of the information which is not there. And even if people want to make sustainable choices, they cannot do so without reliable information. And this is why government introduces measures such as eco labels, energy ratings, environmental disclosure requirement, all of these, because government also wants to send the information to the community that what exactly are you consuming, what kind of environmental impact these products have. Now, if you look at these four market failures, it basically also explains why environmental policy is necessary. And whether it is carbon tax, pollution regulation, subsidies, information campaigns, all of these are basically designed to take care of the market failure. But the challenge is not simply to intervene, but to choose the right policy for the right environmental problem. Now let's try to understand what are these different kinds of environmental policies that have been used, and can only one policy solve all the problem. So I'm sure many of you know about it, because in India we use command and control instruments. It's one of the oldest and most common ways government protect the environment. And the idea is very simple, that the government sets the rules and everyone must follow them. If firms fail to comply to the rule that government has prescribed, they can face fines or other kinds of penalties. The main advantage of command and control regulation, or this approach, is that it provides very clear environmental protection. But I mean, one knows that what is the fine, or one knows what is the rule I need to follow. But the downside is that it is very rigid, and at times it is expensive too. And as the same rule apply to everyone, regardless of their costs or circumstances, so there is also an issue of equity. So if it's a small farm or a big farm, everybody will have to pay equal amount of money, for example. What are the different kinds of command and control regulations? One is emission standards. Government sets limits on the amount of pollution that industries can release, like, for example, limits on industrial wastewater discharged into rivers. These standards reduce pollution, but the issue here is that once firms meet the required limit, now they have very little incentive to reduce emission further. So if you are able to keep the discharge limit within the permissible amount, then you continue to discharge that much, because the other amount, whatever you are now discharging, is permitted. And imagine in a locality, if there are 10 such industries which is discharging wastewater, ensuring that they keep it within the government sanction limit. it would still not solve the problem, right? Each industry is doing good, but if you bring them all together, you still have a large amount of wastewater flowing in. Then comes technology standards. For example, industries must have effluent treatment plants in their industries before they throw their wastewater or any kind of pollution out. So instead of limiting pollution, government may require farms to use specific technology in case of technology standards. And these standards are relatively easy to monitor because inspectors can simply check whether the required technology has been installed. But again, this may discourage innovation because farms focus on meeting the minimum requirement rather than developing better, greener, cleaner technology. There's no incentives for that. They can continue with those in technology because they are following the minimum requirement that has been asked to. Then comes product standards. Government can also regulate products that are sold. For example, fuel efficiency standards for vehicle, energy efficiency rating for appliances, renewable energy requirements. These standards actually help improve environmental performance without requiring consumers to change their behavior. That's also a good thing. The producers is producing fuel efficient fuel, and that you are still going to the petrol pump and putting your fuel, but now the way it has been produced is much more efficient than what it was. You are not asked to change your behavior, but because of this product standard, efficiency has improved. Then there is something called land use regulation. So government may directly control how land is used. For example, there are national parks, protected areas, if you remember, the forest conservation laws, urban zoning, many of these coastal regulation zones. These policies basically protects important ecosystems, but can also, of course, sometimes face political oppositions or difficult to enforce, right? So these are something depends on the situation, the political mood, etc. Resource quota for natural resources, government may limit how much can be extracted, like fishing quotas or even timing of the fishing, groundwater extraction limits. Now you know that in certain areas you cannot extract groundwater at all, given that these are red zones. Timber harvesting permits, these quotas work well only if they are based on sound scientific evidence and are properly enforced. Okay. Then comes the environmental impact assessment, something I am again sure you all know about it. Before approving major projects such as dams, highways, industries, government often require an EIA needs to be conducted. So what does an EIA do? An EIA evaluates the likely environmental and social impacts of a project before construction begins. However, it is important to remember that an EIA does not automatically stop environmental harmful projects. It just ensures that impacts are assessed and considered before decisions are made. Now, if you look at all of these, each one of them has, key strengths and weaknesses. The strengths are, many of these are clear and legally enforceable. It provides certainty about environmental standards. So if I am a business person or industrial house, it becomes much more clear for me, okay, what is the standard of technology I should do? What is the minimum amount of wastewater or maximum amount of wastewater I can discharge, right? And it is also easy for government to communicate and regulate. But then there are weaknesses. What are these weaknesses? They are not so flexible. They're inflexible because, again, like I mentioned, same rule applies to everyone. Firms have little incentive to perform better than the legal standard. So you are not encouraging firms to think more and come with innovative technology because you are not giving them any subsidy or you're not giving them any incentives to do that. Instead, you want them to follow the legal standard. Monitoring and enforcement always is very costly. At many times, you would see that monitoring is not happening because sending every time an inspector to check to comply with whatever is been asked to comply with is also very costly. And it most importantly depends on strong institutions and compliance because your monitoring and enforcement depends on the institution itself. So these are some of the positives or some of the weaknesses and some of the strength of these command and control regulation. Now let's look at another form of regulation or instrument, which we call it as a market-based instrument. That means you are using prices to protect the environment. So unlike the command and control policies, market-based instruments do not tell people exactly what to do. Instead, they they change prices so that people and businesses have an incentive to make environmental friendly choices. So what does that mean basically? So you basically try to make pollution expensive, and people, so that people will pollute less. In a very simplistic way, you are, anything which is expensive, either you would not buy or you would not do it. So it's something that we try to do. And how do you do it? You do it through taxes. For example, environmental taxes can be, say, carbon tax, plastic bag taxes, fuel taxes. The more pollution you create, the more you pay. So government places a tax on these activities that damage the environment, and this also encourages firm to reduce emission because it saves money. And it will also encourage consumers like us to drive little lesser if not needed, because more we drive, higher will be the fuel price. So advantages, it encourages continuous improvement, but the disadvantage is this kind of taxes are politically very difficult to introduce. In any place where you make fuel or anything on which community or people depend, the moment you touch those, for example, a tax on using plastic bag, just imagine how would it go. In many places there, people wouldn't like it. So politically they are very, very sensitive. Then what comes is emission trading, which we call it as cap and trade. Now, again, I would encourage you to read about it, like, because this is not a course on entirely on climate change. I would not explain this in great detail, but instead of charging a test, the government sets a limit, a cap on the total pollution. That companies that pollute now, below that cap can actually, so you are also providing permits to these polluting companies, that this is the cap. Like, just to make it very simplistic, in a month you can only pollute, say, X amount of CO2. So for that X amount of CO2 you get a permit. But suppose if my company could produce my product at a by polluting much lesser than that cap, then I also have the permission to sell my extra cap to somebody else, right? So this is a reward for the farm or to the producers to reduce pollution at a lower cost, because by selling the extra permit, which I don't require anymore because I used a cleaner and a greener technology, I'm also making money. So it is also like incentivizing all the other industries. Okay, we are giving you permit, but if you are able to not use all the permit, you are free to sell this permit somewhere else. So that motivates every industry. Rather than keep buying this permit every year, which is very expensive, let us instead reduce pollution and sell this permit to someone with a cost. So with a price. So I benefit from both sides. I am not going to buy further permit, and additional permit also I'm selling out. So this is a classic example. If you're interested, you can go online and check, which is called European Union Emission Trading System. Has not really worked so much as of now in India. Then you have something called deposit refund systems. These are also very interesting thing. If you go to many countries, like particularly in Europe, if you are consuming Coke or any kind of glass bottle or plastic bottle that you're using, you can actually go back after consumption. You can return those empty bottles and you get some money back, and that actually encourages recycling and reducing of wastage, because I know that I'm going to get the money back, and you can use that money again to buy something else, or maybe buy another Coke. Of course, it's not obviously equivalent. The amount of money you pay to buy a Coke bottle and the money that you get after you send that plastic out for recycling, you would not get equal, but it will become equal if you are able to give at least 4 bottles. So 4 bottles can help you getting 1 new bottle, right? So this is called deposit refund system. Again, a very good system, but you need a proper it cannot be that you're giving people money for able to recycle and reuse, but you do not have a system in place to recycle and reuse that waste. Then something called green subsidies. Government can also reward environmental friendly behavior, like solar panels. You know that there is a subsidy. If you install solar panels in your houses, you make the payment, but then you get almost around 65 to 70% money back. So that's a kind of a reward that government gives for your environmental friendly behavior. there are subsidies in electric vehicles, organic farming is encouraged, wind energy. So these subsidies actually reduces the cost of adopting cleaner technologies, because initially when you start with these technologies, these are expensive, right? Okay, so now let's look at another very new and an interesting concept, which we call it as payment for ecosystem services. Now, one of the things that you watched is, or that you saw in these slides, is the first one is command and control is more about penalty, more about telling people you have to stick. But the second market-based instruments that you saw, it's not about penalty. It is about giving incentive to invest on environmental friendly technologies, environmental friendly behavior. Now, when you talk about nature, nature provides many very valuable services, right? Such as clean water, carbon storage, pollination, many things, biodiversity, flood protection, groundwater recharge. So these are known as ecosystem services. And the idea behind payment for ecosystem service is that people who benefit from nature pay those who protect it, meaning I am not able to protect the nature, but somebody else, by taking care of that forest, by taking care of those river, is protecting it for me to get cleaner air, cleaner water. So is there a possibility that because I don't have the time, I don't have the resources, I make a payment to them to ensure that it remains clean and it remains green forever? So, for example, forest conservation, government or international organization pay communities to protect forests instead of cutting them down. One well-known example, we call it REDD plus, RED plus, which supports forest conservation to reduce, carbon emissions. Similarly, watershed protection, cities depends on clean water from upstream forests. So instead of building expensive water treatment plants, cities may pay upstream communities to conserve forests, right? So you are also saving money. For example, this has worked very well in Costa Rica's national payment to ecosystem services program. Then comes, instead of so I was just trying to give you an example that instead of investing a lot in a city for water treatment plants before you provide water to the community or to the city dwellers, imagine your water itself doesn't require so much of cleaning. So rather than investing on a water treatment plant, what about paying people living upstream from where your source of water comes, right? So that's called payment for ecosystem services. Biodiversity conservation, I think this that sometimes developers are required to restore and protect habitats elsewhere if they damage they can be a huge biodiversity offset if you damage. But then these approaches are easy to be discussed but very difficult to implement. Sustainable agriculture, government may pay farmers to reduce pesticides use, restore wetlands, plant trees, protect wildlife habitats. All of these are known as payment to ecosystem services, meaning that you have to see that the payment that you are making is actually far less than the cost that you would incur if all of these services that ecosystem is providing to you is actually distorted or if it is gone. So rather than letting that happen, why don't we pay those who are the guardian or safeguards of these ecosystems, who are living there for ages, and so that they do not destroy it, you make a payment to them to keep it like as somebody who is guarding these resources. So this is also a very new concept, but the question always is, should nature have a price at all, or should we protect nature because it has value much beyond money? So critics of PES would ask you this question as well. Let's go to voluntary and information-based instruments. Not all environmental policies actually rely on regulations or taxes. Sometimes government encourage better choices by providing information or encourage voluntary action. Like I gave you the example of eco labels. So star rating, 5-star, 4-star, 3-star. Everybody would like to go for 5-star. Not always because 5-star is something that it is friendly, environmental friendly, it is environmentally efficient or energy efficient, because it is also going to reduce your energy bill, right? So consumers can choose products that also is also good for environment. Like, so there you can provide Energy Star appliances, fair trade, all of these are organic. So these also sometimes encourages when you have these kind of labels, eco labels. Sustainability reporting, many companies now publish information about carbon emissions, water use, waste generation, sustainability goals, not so much in India yet, but in many other developed world, it's a mandatory thing that you need to mention what is your carbon footprint in producing this product, right? This helps also investors and consumers to make informed decisions. Then there can be sometimes industries voluntarily may agree to reduce pollution without new laws. So these agreements can work, but only if companies genuinely follow these commitments. Many companies now under CSR are actually voluntarily also trying to reduce the global emission or reduce the water footprint or carbon footprint. Then there are green public procurement, for example, electric buses, recycled paper. These, they are something which we use enormously every day, but government can choose to, instead of going for, fuel buses, you go for fossil fuel buses, you go for electric buses. Sustainable buildings, for example, rainwater harvesting, all of these basically create demand for greener products and also encourages business to invest in cleaner technology. So the information and voluntary actions are useful, but they usually work best when combined with also regulations and economic incentives. That's also important to keep in mind. Now, why we need a mix of policies? No, because no single policy, as you just saw, can solve every environmental problem. Each policy has its strength and has its weaknesses. Now, regulation is best for quick and certain environmental protections. Taxes, it encouraging pollution reduction. Emission trading, it's useful or best for achieving pollution reduction at lower cost. Subsidies are best for supporting new technologies. Payment for ecosystem services is good when you are talking about conserving ecosystem. And of course, information is best for encouraging better consumer choices. So there is no perfect environmental policy. The best approach is usually to combine different policy instruments. Like, for example, regulations set minimum standards, carbon taxes encourage cleaner behavior, eco levels also you can put to help consumers make informed choices, also provide subsidies to support green technologies. Together, all of these policies can become more effective rather than only depending on a single policy. Okay. Now, let us just bring all of these things together for today. What we discussed is, one is market failure, which provides a strong justification that we need environmental policy interventions. We also just discussed that no single instrument is universally best. Policy mix matters more than the choice of any one tool. Command and control, of course, offers a certainty of outcome, but market instruments offer more flexibility and cost efficiency. So they are both complementary. They are not to be looked as rivals, right? Payment to ecosystem schemes may help in conservation, but it also raises a lot of unresolved questions. For example, how do you commodify nature? Whom do you ask to pay, or who pays them? So this is also a very, very complicated and a complex area of work. If you are interested, you can actually do a lot of research on it. Payment to ecosystem services, how can you actually apply it, is a very big area still where limited research has happened. Information and voluntary instruments are necessary complements, but insufficient in their own as well, because it's not just enough that you provide information to people and do nothing, right? Many will read it and still say, oh, this is cheaper, I go with this. Fair trade products are expensive, I don't want to buy. So these are some of the things to remember, and I have also list down some of the essential readings. These are important readings which actually tells you about how all of these policy instruments can be implemented in a way that they complement each other. Okay, good. So I'm going to stop here for this lecture, and we meet in the next class taking this discussion forward. Thank you.